The rain drummed against the windows of Murphy's diner with a steady rhythm that seemed to match the beating of Maya Johnson's tired heart. She pushed through the glass door, her scrubs still damp from the short walk from the hospital across the street. The familiar scent of coffee and bacon grease welcomed her like an old friend, offering comfort after another grueling 12-hour shift in the emergency room. Maya was a sight that had become familiar to the regular patrons of Murphy's over the past 3 years. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned early that life rarely offered easy paths. Her dark skin glistened with droplets of rain, and her natural hair was pulled back in a practical bun that had somehow survived the chaos of her shift. The exhaustion in her warm brown eyes told stories of lives she had tried to save, families she had comforted, and the weight of responsibility she carried on her shoulders every single day. The diner was nearly empty at this hour. It was past 9 in the evening, and most of the dinner crowd had long since departed. Maya preferred it this way. The quiet atmosphere allowed her to decompress, to let the tension slowly seep from her muscles as she sat with a simple meal and tried to process whatever the day had thrown at her. She made her way to her usual booth in the corner, nodding to Ethel, the night shift waitress who had been working at Murphy's longer than Maya had been alive. Ethel was a motherly woman in her 60s with silver hair that she kept in neat curls and a smile that could warm even the coldest heart. She had taken Maya under her wing from the very first night she had stumbled into the diner, exhausted and overwhelmed during her first week at the hospital. "The usual, honey?" Ethel asked, already reaching for the coffee pot. "Please," Maya replied, sliding into the worn vinyl booth. "And maybe some of those biscuits if there are any left." "For you, there's always biscuits left," Ethel winked, pouring the steaming coffee into Maya's cup. As Ethel bustled away, Maya allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. The hospital had been particularly challenging today. They had lost an elderly patient despite their best efforts, and Maya could still see the devastation in the family's eyes. It was part of the job, she knew that, but it never got easier. Each loss felt personal, each family's pain became her own. She was so lost in her thoughts that she almost didn't notice the elderly man sitting alone in the booth across from her. He was perhaps in his 70s, with silver hair that had once been thick and dark, now thinning but still carefully combed. His clothes were clean but worn, the kind of careful maintenance that spoke of someone living on a fixed income. A simple brown cardigan hung loosely on his thin frame, and his hands, weathered and spotted with age, trembled slightly as he lifted his coffee cup to his lips. What struck Maya most was not his appearance, but the profound loneliness that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a furnace. He sat perfectly still, staring out the rain-streaked window with eyes that held decades of memories and recent sorrow. His meal sat largely untouched before him, growing cold as the minutes ticked by. Maya had always been sensitive to the emotions of others. It was what made her such a good nurse, but it was also what sometimes made life unbearably heavy. She could see pain in people's faces, could sense when someone was struggling even when they tried to hide it. This man was drowning in solitude, and it called to something deep within her chest. She watched him for several minutes, noting how his shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight, how his fingers occasionally reached across the table as if expecting to find another hand there, only to close around empty air. There was something heartbreakingly familiar about his posture, reminiscent of her own grandfather in his final years after her grandmother had passed. Ethel returned with Maya's order, setting down a plate of biscuits and gravy alongside the coffee. "That's Harold," she said quietly, noticing Maya's gaze. "Been coming in here every Tuesday night for about 6 months now. Always orders the meatloaf, barely touches it. Poor thing lost his wife recently." Maya's heart clenched. She knew that kind of grief intimately. She had watched her grandfather waste away after losing the love of his life, had seen how food lost its taste and the world lost its color when the person who gave life meaning was suddenly gone. "Does he have family?" Maya asked, still watching Harold as he slowly stirred his coffee for the dozenth time. Ethel shrugged. "Hard to say. He's not much of a talker. Pays his bill, leaves a decent tip despite not having much, and goes home. Been worrying about him, to be honest. Looks thinner every week." Maya made a decision that would change both their lives, though she had no way of knowing it at the time. She picked up her coffee cup and plate of biscuits and stood up. Mind if I keep you company? She asked Harold, already moving toward his booth. Harold looked up, startled. His pale blue eyes, though dimmed by grief, still held intelligence and kindness. For a moment, he seemed confused, as if he couldn't quite believe someone was actually speaking to him. Are you sure? I'm not very good company these days. Neither am I, Maya said with a gentle smile, sliding into the booth across from him. I'm Maya. I work at the hospital across the street. Harold, he replied, his voice rusty from disuse. Harold Peterson. I used to work at the post office before I retired. And so began a conversation that neither of them expected. Maya found Harold to be surprisingly easy to talk to once he warmed up. His initial hesitation melted away as she asked gentle questions about his life, his work, his interests. She learned that he had been married to his wife Dorothy for 47 years before cancer took her just 8 months ago. They had never had children, which made his grief even more isolating. Harold, for his part, was amazed by Maya's kindness. It had been so long since anyone had shown genuine interest in him as a person rather than simply tolerating his presence. Maya listened when he talked about Dorothy, never rushing him or trying to change the subject when his eyes grew misty. She shared stories about her work at the hospital, carefully avoiding the difficult parts but painting pictures of the small victories and moments of human connection that made her job worthwhile. As the evening wore on, Maya noticed that Harold began to eat his meatloaf. Not much, but more than he had been eating when she first sat down. It was a small victory, but one that filled her with quiet satisfaction. Sometimes the simplest acts of human connection could provide more healing than any medicine. You remind me of Dorothy, Harold said suddenly, his voice soft with memory. Not in appearance, of course, but in spirit. She had this way of making everyone feel seen, feel valuable. She used to volunteer at the children's hospital before she got sick. Always said that a smile and a listening ear could work miracles. Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. She sounds like a wonderful woman. She was, Harold nodded. 47 years, and I never got tired of coming home to her. Don't know what I'm supposed to do with myself now. The honesty in his voice broke Maya's heart. She reached across the table and gently covered his weathered hand with hers. You take it one day at a time, she said. That's all any of us can do. Harold stared down at their joined hands, and, for a moment, Maya thought he might cry. Instead, he squeezed her fingers gently. Thank you, he whispered. I can't remember the last time someone. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Maya understood. In a world that often forgot about the elderly, that treated them as invisible or burdensome, simple human kindness had become rare and precious. They talked until the diner began to close, sharing stories and finding common ground in unexpected places. Harold had served briefly in Vietnam, though he rarely talked about it. Maya's father had been a veteran too, and she understood the particular weight that some experiences left on a person's shoulders. Harold had grown up poor in rural Mississippi before moving north for work. Maya's family had made a similar journey, seeking better opportunities and escaping the lingering shadows of the Jim Crow South. When it was time to leave, Harold insisted on paying for both their meals despite Maya's protests. Please, he said. It's been the best evening I've had in months. Let an old man have his dignity. Maya relented, but made him promise to meet her at the same booth the following Tuesday. I work the same shift every week, she explained. And I could use the company too. Harold's face lit up with the first genuine smile Maya had seen from him all evening. I'd like that very much. As they parted ways in the parking lot, Maya watched Harold walk slowly to an old but well-maintained sedan. He moved carefully, the way elderly people do when they've learned to be cautious about falls and injuries. There was still sadness in his posture, but something had shifted. He no longer looked quite so much like a man who had given up on the world. Maya drove home to her small apartment, her heart full despite her exhaustion. She had always believed that healing came in many forms, and tonight had reminded her that sometimes the most powerful medicine was simply showing up for another human being. She couldn't have known, as she fell asleep that night, that Harold Peterson was not quite the simple retired postal worker he appeared to be. She couldn't have imagined that the quiet, grieving widower she had shared dinner with had a story that would soon change her life in ways she never could have anticipated. In his own modest home across town, Harold sat in his favorite chair, the one where he used to read the evening paper to Dorothy. For the first time since her funeral, the silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt peaceful. He thought about Maya's easy laugh, her genuine interest in his stories, the way she had listened without judgment when he talked about his grief. Tomorrow, he decided, he would call his son. They hadn't spoken in over a year, not since the bitter argument that had driven a wedge between them. Dorothy had always been the bridge between them, smoothing over their differences and maintaining the fragile peace. Without her, the silence had stretched on and on until it seemed impossible to break. But tonight, sitting in the quiet comfort of his living room, Harold felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. If a young stranger could show him such kindness, such genuine care, perhaps it wasn't too late to heal other wounds as well. Perhaps Dorothy's spirit lived on in acts of compassion like the one Maya had shown him tonight. He picked up the phone, then set it down again. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow he would find the courage to reach out. Tonight, it was enough to sit with the warm memory of an unexpected friendship and the promise of another Tuesday evening that wouldn't have to be spent alone. Maya, meanwhile, prepared for another day at the hospital, unaware that her simple act of kindness had set in motion a chain of events that would ripple through both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest power, and sometimes sitting down with a lonely stranger can change everything. The following Tuesday couldn't come fast enough for Harold Peterson. For the first time in months, he found himself looking forward to something. Throughout the week, he caught himself thinking about Maya's warm smile, her easy conversation, and the way she had made him feel human again rather than just a ghost haunting his own life. Harold spent Tuesday afternoon preparing for their dinner like it was the most important appointment of his year. He showered carefully, taking time to trim his beard and comb his thinning hair just so. He selected his best cardigan, the navy blue one that Dorothy had bought him for Christmas 2 years ago. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, a lavender scent that had lingered in their closet long after she was gone. As he drove to Murphy's Diner, Harold's hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, but it wasn't entirely from age or grief this time. It was anticipation mixed with nervous energy. What if Maya didn't show up? What if she had only been being polite last week? What if she realized that spending time with a grieving old man was more burden than she wanted to take on? These worries evaporated the moment he walked into the diner and saw Maya already seated in their booth, still in her hospital scrubs, reading something on her phone while she waited. She looked up as he approached, and her face broke into that same genuine smile that had warmed his heart a week ago. "Harold," she called out, standing to give him a brief, gentle hug. The gesture caught him off guard. It had been so long since anyone had hugged him that he almost forgot how to respond. "I was hoping you'd make it. How was your week?" As they settled into the booth, Harold found himself actually having an answer to that question. "Better than it's been in a long time," he admitted. "Looking forward to tonight helped me get through the difficult days." Ethel appeared as if by magic, coffee pot in hand and a knowing smile on her face. "Well, would you look at that," she said, pouring coffee for both of them. "Harold, you look like a new man. Maya, whatever you did last week, keep doing it." Maya laughed, a sound that Harold was beginning to treasure. "I think Harold did more for me than I did for him. Sometimes we all need reminding that we're not alone in the world." Over the next 2 hours, their conversation flowed even more easily than it had the week before. Harold found himself sharing stories he hadn't told in years, tales from his childhood in Mississippi, his early days working for the Postal Service, the adventures he and Dorothy had shared in their younger years. Maya was a natural storyteller herself, painting vivid pictures of life in the emergency room without dwelling on the trauma, focusing instead on the moments of human resilience and unexpected joy that sustained her through the difficult shifts. "Tell me about Dorothy," Maya said gently during a lull in conversation. "What was she like when you first met her?" Harold's eyes grew distant, but not with the sharp pain that usually accompanied thoughts of his late wife. Instead, there was a warmth there, a fondness for memories that were becoming easier to access without drowning in grief. She was a secretary at the main post office when I was promoted to supervisor, he began, his voice soft with remembrance. First day on the job, I was so nervous I could barely string 2 sentences together. There was this mountain of paperwork on my desk, and I had no idea where to start. Dorothy appeared at my door with a cup of coffee and the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen. "Welcome to the chaos, Mr. Peterson," she said. "Don't worry, we'll help you figure it out." Maya smiled, encouraging him to continue. "She had this way about her," Harold went on. "Could organize anything, solve any problem, but she never made you feel stupid for needing help. Took me 3 months to work up the courage to ask her to dinner. When I finally did, she laughed and said, 'I was wondering how long you were going to take. I already cleared my Saturday night just in case.'" "She sounds wonderful," Maya said. "How long were you together before you got married?" 2 years of dating, then 47 years of marriage. She used to say we were like 2 puzzle pieces that just fit together perfectly. Different in so many ways, but somehow complementing each other. Harold paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "She was the brave one, always pushing me to try new things, take chances. I was the cautious one, making sure we stayed grounded. It worked." Maya watched the play of emotions across Harold's weathered face. She had seen enough grief in her work to recognize when someone was beginning to heal, when memories were shifting from sources of pure pain to treasured keepsakes of love. Harold was making that transition, slowly but surely. "She would have liked you," Harold said suddenly, looking directly at Maya. "Dorothy always said you could tell everything you needed to know about a person by how they treated strangers. She had a soft spot for helpers, doctors, nurses, teachers. Said they were the backbone of civilization." "I wish I could have met her," Maya replied honestly. "Though in a way, I feel like I'm getting to know her through your stories." They were interrupted by the arrival of Harold's regular meatloaf and Maya's chicken sandwich. As they ate, Harold surprised himself by finishing nearly his entire meal. Food was beginning to have taste again, and he realized it was because he had someone to share it with. "Can I ask you something personal?" Harold said as they neared the end of their meal. Maya nodded, curious. "Do you have family? Someone special? I hope you don't mind an old man's nosiness, but you seem like such a caring person. I can't imagine you don't have people who appreciate that about you." Maya's expression grew thoughtful. "My parents live about 3 hours south of here. Good people, worked hard their whole lives to give me opportunities they never had. My father was a mechanic, my mother cleaned offices at night and took care of us during the day. They sacrificed a lot so I could go to nursing school." She paused, stirring her coffee absently. "As for someone special, there was someone. Marcus. We dated through college and into nursing school. I thought we'd end up married, but he got a job offer in California right after graduation. Said long distance wouldn't work, that we should make a clean break." Harold heard the lingering hurt in her voice. "That must have been difficult." "It was. But maybe it was for the best. He wanted someone who would put him first, always. My work has always been important to me, and he never really understood that. He used to say I cared more about my patients than I did about him." Maya shrugged. "Maybe he was right. I can't help but feel responsible for the people in my care." "That's not a flaw," Harold said firmly. "That's what makes you good at what you do. Dorothy was the same way with her volunteer work. Some people are just built to care for others. It's a gift, not a burden." Maya smiled gratefully. "Thank you for saying that. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just avoiding real intimacy by throwing myself into work. Or maybe you haven't met someone who understands that your capacity for caring is what makes you special, not what makes you difficult to love," Harold suggested gently. They talked until closing time again, and once again Harold insisted on paying. As they prepared to leave, Maya hesitated for a moment. "Harold, can I ask you something? Have you thought about reconnecting with any old friends? Other family?" I know Dorothy was your world, but isolation can be dangerous, especially when you're grieving. Harold was quiet for a long moment. There is someone, he admitted finally. My son. We had a falling out about a year before Dorothy got sick. Stupid, stubborn pride on both our parts. Dorothy always said we were too much alike for our own good, both too proud to be the first one to apologize. What happened? Harold sighed heavily. He made some choices I didn't approve of, said some things in anger. I said some things too. The last conversation we had. He shook his head. It wasn't good. Dorothy kept trying to get us to make up, but we're both hard-headed. She died without seeing us reconcile, and I'll never forgive myself for that. Maya reached across and squeezed his hand. It's not too late, you know. Pride is a luxury that gets more expensive as we get older. I don't even know if he'd want to hear from me. It's been over a year since we spoke. You'll never know unless you try. What's the worst that could happen? He says no? You're already living with that. But what's the best that could happen? Harold considered this as they walked to their cars. The idea of calling his son terrified him, but Maya's words had planted a seed. Maybe it was time to stop letting pride dictate his choices. Dorothy would have wanted him to try. Same time next week? Maya asked as she unlocked her car door. Wouldn't miss it, Harold replied, meaning every word. As Harold drove home that night, he felt lighter than he had in months. The weekly dinners with Maya were becoming an anchor point, something stable and positive to build the rest of his week around. For the first time since Dorothy's death, he was beginning to believe that healing was possible, that life might still hold moments of joy and connection. Maya, meanwhile, found herself thinking about Harold's situation with his son as she prepared for bed. She knew from her work how devastating family estrangements could be, especially when they were compounded by grief. She had seen too many deathbed reconciliations that came almost too late, and she had also seen the regret that lingered when those reconciliations never came at all. She thought about her own relationship with her parents, how they talked every Sunday without fail, how they had supported her through nursing school and every challenge since. Not everyone was lucky enough to have that kind of unconditional love, but everyone deserved the chance to heal broken relationships if possible. The following day, Maya found herself distracted during her shift, thinking about Harold eating alone in his empty house, missing his wife and estranged from his only child. During her lunch break, she made a decision. She pulled out her phone and did something that would have seemed impossible just weeks ago. She started researching how to help someone reconnect with estranged family members. Meanwhile, across town, Harold sat in his living room staring at the telephone. He had pulled out an old address book and found his son's number, written in Dorothy's careful handwriting. His finger hovered over the digits, but every time he started to dial, he lost his nerve. What would he say? How do you bridge a gap that had been widening for over a year? How do you apologize for things said in anger when pride has had so much time to calcify into stubborn resentment? But Maya's words kept echoing in his mind. Pride is a luxury that gets more expensive as we get older. Dorothy had always said something similar, that being right was less important than being happy, and being happy was less important than being loving. Tomorrow, Harold promised himself. Tomorrow he would find the courage to make the call. Tonight, he would sit with the possibility and let it settle into his bones, this idea that redemption might still be possible, that some bridges could be rebuilt even after they had been burned. Neither Maya nor Harold could have predicted that their simple Tuesday night dinners would set in motion a series of events that would transform not just their own lives, but ripple outward in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Sometimes the greatest changes begin with the smallest gestures, a lonely man gathering courage to heal an old wound, a kind woman refusing to let someone suffer in isolation, two people finding friendship across the divide of age and circumstance and discovering that human connection knows no boundaries. Harold Peterson's hands shook as he held the telephone receiver, his son's number written on a piece of paper in front of him. It was Thursday afternoon, 2 days after his dinner with Maya, and he had been sitting in the same chair for nearly an hour, building up the courage to make the call. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, its familiar sound echoing through the quiet house. Dorothy had loved that clock, had insisted on winding it every Sunday morning after church. Now Harold maintained the ritual, though he often wondered why he bothered keeping time when each day stretched endlessly into the next. Finally, with Maya's encouraging words echoing in his mind, Harold dialed the number. His heart pounded as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. He was just about to hang up when a familiar voice answered. Peterson Industries, Michael Peterson's office. This is Jennifer speaking. Harold's breath caught. His son had an office assistant now. Of course he did. That detail alone told Harold how much distance had grown between them, how much of his son's life he had missed. I'd like to speak with Michael, please. This is Harold Peterson, his father. There was a pause on the other end. Oh. Mr. Peterson, please hold on just one moment. Harold waited, his palms sweating despite the cool autumn air drifting through his windows. He could hear muffled voices in the background, then, footsteps approaching the phone. Dad? The word hit Harold like a physical blow. It had been over a year since he had heard his son's voice, and the mixture of surprise, wariness, and something that might have been hope in that single word nearly brought him to tears. Hello, Michael, Harold managed, his voice rougher than he intended. I know this is unexpected. I was hoping we could talk. Another pause, longer this time. Harold could practically hear his son thinking, weighing his response. Is everything all right? Are you okay? The concern in Michael's voice gave Harold hope. Despite everything that had passed between them, his son still cared about his well-being. I'm fine. Well, as fine as can be expected. I know it's been too long, son. Much too long. I was hoping, maybe we could meet somewhere. Talk properly. Dad, Michael's voice trailed off, and Harold could hear the conflict there. A lot has happened since we last spoke. Things have changed. I know. And I know I bear responsibility for that. I said things I shouldn't have said, let my pride get in the way of what really mattered. Your mother tried to tell me that, but I was too stubborn to listen. At the mention of Dorothy, Michael's voice softened. How are you handling everything? Mom's passing, I mean. I wanted to call, I should have called, but after our last conversation. You did call, Harold said quietly. For the funeral. You sent those beautiful flowers. Dorothy would have loved them. But I should have done more. Should have been there for you. Harold closed his eyes, remembering the day of Dorothy's funeral. Michael had indeed sent flowers, a massive arrangement of white lilies and roses, but he hadn't come. Harold had stood graveside surrounded by neighbors and friends, but without his only child beside him. At the time, his pride had been hurt, but now he could see the pain from both sides. We both made mistakes, son. I'm calling because I met someone recently who reminded me that pride is a luxury that gets more expensive as we get older. Your mother always said life's too short to waste on old grudges. You met someone? Harold smiled, thinking of Maya's infectious warmth. A young woman, a nurse at the hospital. We have dinner together on Tuesday nights. Nothing romantic, he added quickly. Just 2 people who didn't want to eat alone. She's been encouraging me to reach out to you. She sounds wise. She is. Maya has this way of seeing straight to the heart of things. She asked me what was more important, being right or being happy. And, you know what? I realized I don't even remember what we were fighting about anymore. Not clearly. But, I remember perfectly how it felt to lose you. Michael was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. I remember too, Dad. I've missed you. Missed Mom. This last year has been hard, Harold finished. For both of us. Could we really do this? Start over, I mean? I'd like to try. If you're willing. I'm willing. But, Dad, there are things you need to know. About my life, about what I've been doing. Things that might surprise you. Harold thought about this. During their estrangement, he had deliberately avoided learning anything about his son's life, telling himself it was because he didn't care. Now he realized it was because he cared too much, and the separation hurt too deeply to probe. Whatever it is, we can work through it. Your mother always said we were more alike than we wanted to admit, both too proud for our own good, but both capable of love when we stopped being afraid of it. Are you free Saturday afternoon? Maybe we could meet somewhere neutral, talk properly. Harold's heart leaped. I'd like that very much. Where would you suggest? There's a coffee shop downtown, Meridian Cafe. It's quiet, good place to talk. Would 2 o'clock work for you? Perfect. Michael, thank you for giving us this chance. Thank you for making the call, Dad. I wanted to so many times, but I didn't know how. After they hung up, Harold sat in his chair for a long time, alternating between excitement and terror. What if the meeting went badly? What if they discovered that too much damage had been done? But Maya's words came back to him. Sometimes you had to risk disappointment to find healing. Meanwhile, 3 states away, Michael Peterson stood in his corner office on the 40th floor of a gleaming downtown building, looking out at the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. At 35, he had built something beyond his father's wildest dreams, a technology empire that had made him one of the youngest billionaires in the country. But all the success in the world couldn't fill the hole left by his estrangement from his family. Michael had inherited his father's pride and his mother's heart, a combination that had served him well in business but poorly in personal relationships. The fight with his father had started over Michael's decision to drop out of law school to pursue a technology startup. Harold, who valued stability and traditional career paths, had been furious. Words were said on both sides that couldn't be taken back easily. The success that followed had vindicated Michael's choice but somehow made the reconciliation harder. How do you tell your father, who worked for the Postal Service for 40 years and worried about making mortgage payments, that you're worth billions? How do you bridge that gap without seeming to prove that you were right to reject his values? Michael's assistant Jennifer knocked softly on his office door. Mr. Peterson? Your 2 o'clock cancelled. Would you like me to reschedule? Actually, cancel everything for Saturday afternoon. I have a family meeting that's long overdue. Jennifer raised her eyebrows but simply nodded. In the 5 years she had worked for Michael, she had never known him to have any family commitments. She had always assumed he had no family left, given how isolated he seemed despite his wealth and success. That evening, Michael called his personal assistant Sarah, who managed his more private affairs. I need you to do something discreet for me. I'm meeting my father on Saturday, and I want to know everything about his current situation. Financial status, health, living conditions. Everything. But, Sarah, and this is important, I want this done without him knowing. Can you handle that? Of course, Mr. Peterson. Should I prioritize speed or thoroughness? Thoroughness. I want to know how he's really doing, not just how he says he's doing. Michael had learned long ago that information was power, and he wanted to understand exactly what his father's life looked like now. If Harold needed help, Michael intended to provide it, but he needed to know the full situation first. As Saturday approached, both father and son prepared for their reunion in different ways. Harold spent Friday evening looking through photo albums, remembering the boy Michael had been before ambition and pride had driven them apart. He had been a brilliant child, always tinkering with electronics, always asking questions about how things worked. Dorothy had been so proud of his curiosity, his drive to understand the world around him. Michael, meanwhile, received Sarah's report on Friday night and was shocked by what he learned. His father was living modestly but not poorly, maintaining the same small house where Michael had grown up. His finances were tight but stable, thanks to his Postal Service pension and Dorothy's life insurance. What concerned Michael most was the isolation, the reports of his father eating alone at the same diner every week, the neighbors' observations about how thin and listless he had become since Dorothy's death. But there was one bright note in the report that intrigued Michael: the friendship with the nurse named Maya Johnson. The private investigator had spoken to several people at Murphy's Diner, and everyone confirmed that Harold had seemed markedly improved since beginning his weekly dinners with the young woman. The waitress Ethel had been particularly effusive about Maya's positive influence on Harold's mood and health. Saturday afternoon arrived with the crisp clarity that only October could provide. Harold dressed carefully in his best suit, the navy one he had worn to church every Sunday when Dorothy was alive. He arrived at Meridian Cafe 15 minutes early, choosing a table near the back where they could speak privately. Michael arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, and Harold's breath caught when he saw his son walk through the door. Michael had always been tall, but success had given him a confidence and presence that was immediately noticeable. His suit was perfectly tailored, his hair expertly styled, and he moved with the assured grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention. But what struck Harold most was that despite the polish and obvious prosperity, Michael was still recognizably his son. The boy who had taken apart every electronic device in the house just to see how it worked, who had stayed up late reading science magazines under his covers, who had once dreamed of building computers that could think like humans. Dad. Michael stood beside the table, uncertainty flickering across his features. Son. Harold stood as well, and, for a moment they simply looked at each other across the gulf of lost time. Then, Michael stepped forward and embraced his father, and Harold felt something inside his chest that had been frozen for over a year finally begin to thaw. They held each other for a long moment, neither speaking, both trying to communicate a year's worth of regret and love in a simple gesture. When they finally sat down, Harold studied his son's face, noting the lines of stress around his eyes, the way his hands moved restlessly on the table. "You look successful," Harold said finally. "Prosp."